What if I told you that one of the most dangerous women in America didn't use brute force to escape from prison, but her mind? This is the story of Sarah Jo Pender, a convicted murderer who orchestrated one of the most notorious and brilliant prison escapes in modern history. But to understand how she pulled it off, we first need to know what led her to prison in the first place. Sarah Jo Pender's journey into the dark side began in the early 2000s. She seemed like any other young woman living in Indiana, but her life would take a shocking turn when she became entangled in a double homicide. In October 2000, Sarah and her then-boyfriend, Richard Hull, were living with two roommates in their home. But tensions were rising within the house. Richard was a small-time drug dealer, and their roommates, Andrew Cataldi and Tricia Nordman, were starting to cause trouble. Richard and Sarah had enough, and one fateful night things escalated in a way no one expected. Richard Hull shot both Andrew and Tricia, killing them instantly. But according to the prosecution, Sarah Jo Pender wasn't just a passive observer. They claimed she was the mastermind, encouraging Hull to carry out the murders and even helping to dispose of the bodies afterward. While Richard pulled the trigger, Sarah, they said, pulled the strings. Sarah was convicted and sentenced to 110 years in prison for her role in the crime. The jury believed she was the one who had orchestrated the killings, even though she never physically carried them out. Despite this, Sarah continued to insist she was innocent, a claim that would become central to her manipulation skills behind bars. She saw herself as a victim of circumstance, trapped in a system that had wrongfully convicted her. But if she was going to prove her innocence, she knew she had to get out of prison first. Sarah Jo Pender was no ordinary inmate. She had a remarkable ability to gain the trust of those around her, whether it was other inmates or prison staff. She wasn't just charismatic, she was calculating. While she sat in Rockville Correctional Facility, her mind was constantly working on how to break free. And then she found her opportunity in the form of a prison guard named Scott Spittler. Spittler was like many guards working in prisons across America, someone who probably never imagined being involved in a prisoner's escape. But Sarah Jo Pender had other plans. She saw in Spittler someone she could manipulate, someone she could turn to her advantage. Using her charm and wits, Sarah began to form a relationship with him. Over time, she carefully played on his emotions, gradually making him believe that she wasn't the cold-blooded killer she had been portrayed as, but rather someone who had been wronged by the system. She made Spittler feel like he was her only hope, the only person who could understand her plight. It didn't take long before Spittler became emotionally entangled in Sarah's story. She convinced him to do the unthinkable, help her escape from the very prison he was sworn to guard. Sarah's manipulation wasn't fast or obvious. It was slow and methodical, like a spider weaving a web around its prey. In early August 2008, the plan began to take shape. Sarah convinced Spittler to smuggle in civilian clothes for her. The idea was simple. If she could look like a visitor or a staff member, she could blend in and simply walk out of the prison. Spittler, now fully under Sarah's control, agreed. He brought the clothes in and handed them over to her, unaware that he was about to help one of the most dangerous prisoners walk free. On August 4, 2008, Sarah Jo Pender put the plan into action. Wearing her smuggled civilian clothes, she walked through the prison with an air of confidence that no one questioned. In a matter of minutes, she had made her way to the gates, where Spittler was waiting with the final piece of the puzzle, a getaway van. Sarah climbed into the van and disappeared into the outside world. Her escape was so smooth, so flawless, that it took hours for the prison staff to even realize she was gone. Sarah's escape sent shockwaves through the prison system and law enforcement. This wasn't a violent, chaotic break for freedom. It was calm, calculated, and devastatingly effective. For the next 136 days, Sarah Jo Pender was a fugitive on the run, but her time in freedom was anything but easy. Sarah was now a woman on the most wanted list, her face plastered across news outlets nationwide. But she didn't let that stop her. She was smart, constantly changing her appearance and moving from place to place. At first, she stayed with an old friend in Indianapolis, but it didn't take long before she realized that staying in one place too long would only increase the chances of getting caught. Over the next few months, Sarah used fake identities, moving between different states and staying just out of reach of the authorities. She knew how to stay under the radar, but as the pressure mounted, her options began to dwindle. She lived in cheap motels, rented rooms, and relied on people who didn't know her past. But she couldn't hide forever. As the months passed, law enforcement continued to search for her, tracking down leads and following her trail. The problem was Sarah was always one step ahead. It seemed like no matter where they looked, she had already moved on. But as with many fugitives, it wasn't the police who would ultimately bring her down. It was a mistake made by someone she trusted. A tip from a viewer of the TV show America's Most Wanted eventually led to Sarah's capture. In December 2008, she was found living in a house in Chicago, blending in with a group of people who had no idea they were harboring one of the country's most wanted criminals. The authorities stormed the house, and Sarah Jo Pender's time on the run came to an abrupt end. When the police arrested her, Sarah still claimed that she was innocent of the murders that had landed her in prison in the first place. But now she was facing new charges: escape, aiding and abetting, and conspiracy. The woman who had masterminded a prison break using nothing but her charm and intelligence was back behind bars. But this time, there would be no escape. Scott Spittler, the guard who had helped Sarah escape, wasn't so lucky either. He was caught and convicted for his role in the escape, serving several years behind bars himself. His life, much like Sarah's, had been completely derailed by her manipulation. He went from being a trusted prison guard to an inmate, all because of the power Sarah Jo Pender had over him. Sarah's story didn't end there. While back in prison, she continued to maintain her innocence, claiming that she had been wrongfully convicted and that the system had failed her. To this day, she remains one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in the world of prison escapes. Her story is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones with the guns, but the ones with the ability to control and manipulate those around them. Sarah Jo Pender didn't use violence to escape, she used her mind. And in doing so, she outsmarted the very system that had locked her away. Now, locked away once again, Sarah Jo Pender is serving the rest of her sentence in a maximum security prison. Her escape is a thing of the past, but the questions it raises about the power of manipulation and the fragility of the human mind linger on. How many more Sarah Jo Penders are out there quietly pulling the strings, waiting for their chance to break free?